our schedule for 2 weeks from now. So please, if you guys have anything, let me know. We want to try to keep this as regular as possible. At one point, when we were really, really regular, there was like people sitting on the floors in here because they knew it was coming, they knew the content was good. But we got a little irregular over the holiday break, December time frame. We've been struggling to catch up ever since then with the shutdown and all the other stuff, right? So the more regular we are, I think the more this will go back, and especially if we have good content, which the content primarily comes from people within our group. So the more we can contribute to that, if you have someone that you know has good content, topic, documented it, a topic, that's where we got Robert talking to that. Like doing some stuff in PowerShell, and hey, can you do the topic and that? Like when you're talking for like more than 10 minutes, how you do actually do a talk on something that is talking about. And that's how we did these presentations. So the more people you guys doing that, the easier it becomes. With that, Robert, I'll try to do that. Okay, thanks. You have to shut it down and just turn it down. So you can still see it on the side. It's the IT mountain. It's kind of the death of that. So you have to start that through the concept of it. Well, as you can see and heard, my name is Rob Ferguson. Fairly new to NASA, been here like 4 or 5 months. I'm not a PowerShell super expert by any means. I think it's very tough to be a PowerShell expert. You really need to work on it every day. But the good thing is you can do pretty cool stuff very quickly without too much knowledge. So I'd like to share some of my experiences that I've had recently with a couple of projects I worked on here at NASA, and kind of what PowerShell is, who uses it, why they use it, and maybe how you can use it in the future if you don't already use it. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free. I'd like to pose some challenges that I've come across and see how maybe you guys would have solved it in your development space, and then compare it how we can do it in PowerShell. I'll go through some examples, some little scripts, things like that. So PowerShell is an object-oriented scripting language. You could think of it like command prompt on steroids. It's part of every Windows system, if you didn't know. So if you just search on your computer for PowerShell, you'll find it. It's on workstations and servers. It's based on the .NET framework. So you can actually create .NET objects and call classes from within the script, which is pretty neat. And I'll show you that in a little bit. It includes an ISE. If you're a developer, IDE, developer environment. This is a scripting environment. It makes it nice to create your scripts and run them. PowerShell is extensible and flexible. Everyone can create something for PowerShell. You can create a little module and someone else can use it. And there's a very large community for this. A lot of people use it, so there's a lot of good stuff out there. Like a lot of stuff I've been looking up as I go along, it's already been done in PowerShell. And I can just grab a script and just run the script. So why do people use PowerShell? It makes both admin and development tasks easier. I forgot to mention my background a little bit, but I'm a SharePoint developer / admin, so I kind of do both worlds. And I've used PowerShell for both tasks. For a while, for like 3 or 4 years, I used PowerShell just for admin tasks. You're already going there.
But recently, I've been using it for some development projects. In your development space, if you come across a challenge, you might be thinking of how you can do it in your development style or language or framework. And it can be, months of work and, all these classes and files and whatnot. You can do a lot of things if you take a look in PowerShell with just a lot fewer lines. Like I mentioned before, it's pretty easy to pick up. Sorry for the lame joke there, but yeah, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to learn it. Increased productivity, you can automate and schedule your scripts. So I'll give you an example on the admin side. Say you're managing like 200 servers, and you have to make sure a service is running on all those servers. You could use your favorite third-party purchase tool if it has that functionality, or you can just run a simple PowerShell script, even schedule it to run however often you want it, every day, once a week, and it can run through all those 200 servers pretty quickly. Little tidbit there is, yes, you can do it on remote machines. So I can run a script from a remote machine, assuming I have access to it. The last thing I throw on there is saves money, ? So these two examples I'm going to show are projects that I worked on that I believe that PowerShell prevented us from having to purchase a third-party tool. And they still have to pay my salary, but saves them from having to dip into their extra budget, for purchasing a third-party tool. That's basically the slides. I'm going to go into the couple of challenges that I've faced, kind of describe them, how I tackled them, and I'm going to go through the script and kind of show you the pieces on how it works, and kind of try and give you guys some inspiration or some ideas of maybe things that you could think of that you could do, in your development work or admin work. So these are both migrations. We're moving from one system into another. In this case, they're both SharePoint, since I'm a SharePoint developer. But you can easily replace this with your enterprise content management of choice, whether it be SharePoint or some other thing. So this first one was from a file share into SharePoint, which is pretty common for people to do over time, is they have a whole bunch of files in their file share, and they just want to move them into SharePoint. Now, it's not as simple as just dragging and dropping everything, because there's a lot of gotchas in there, invalid symbols, nested folders, the size of the files, can time out your drag and drop feature. So in this particular one, we had 20,000 documents, 300 gigabytes of data, and yes, there were some nested folders. Now, this isn't a super huge amount, but one of the biggest things that they wanted was to add metadata to each file based on the data that they put inside of a spreadsheet. So I don't know if you can really see it clearly here, but on kind of the right side, I have a little example of what the folders were like. In this case, I was lucky enough that the folders were fairly structured enough. So they had documents 0 to 1,000, 1 to 2,000, and etc. And inside the folders, this is what the files kind of look like. It had, kind of a number here, and then a kind of a title of the document. In the spreadsheet that they gave me, they have the document number, the name, and then a bunch of metadata that we had to add in SharePoint. So tricky part here is it doesn't really line up nicely, right? This document, this file name here on the right side is nowhere here in the spreadsheet. It doesn't really match up. So what it really is this document number first column is their Office internal identifier for their document. And when they have the files in their file share, luckily enough, they've added the document number there, but then everything after that is jumble stuff that doesn't really match up what the document name is here. So there could be, things cut off, symbols here that are not in the spreadsheet. So we have to match up this part of the file name with this document number. So if you think about this in your development space, you know, when I used to do .NET stuff exclusively, I could think this could take many months and so many files, and I'd be working on this forever. I managed to get this script going in just a couple weeks. And I'm going to try and show you that script, if I can figure this out. Okay. Sorry, I'm kind of new to using the mouse over here. There are too many places to get to go. Okay. So I put in a bunch of comments so I can remind myself what I'm doing. This whole process took 400 lines of code. If I was more of a PowerShell expert, I'm sure I can chop this down in half or more. Just real quick to back up, if you just type in PowerShell in any Windows, you'll see some results. Windows PowerShell is going to be your kind of basic command line interface, kind of like command prompt, but looks a little different. So if you've ever seen this kind of iconic blue, you've probably been in PowerShell, whether you knew it or not. What you see here is the ISE, the scripting environment. So in the same window, I have, you know, the script, and then I can run that script and see the output here. So I have a few sections for this script. I perform a bunch of analysis on all the files, modify the files if they need to be modified based on, you know, invalid symbols, or the file name is too long, something like that. Then I do the actual migration, and then some analysis after migration. So again, it's quite simple to, you know, use your favorite search engine and look up a tool for migrating file shares into SharePoint. But it can be done right here in PowerShell. Now, I'm not saying it can be done every time, but it's something to look for if you have a challenge like this. It could be an option that you have in your back pocket. So I'm going to go through the analysis a little bit. First, I'm going to pull the number of files in the file share to see how many there are. And remember, there's nested folders in here. I'm pulling the number of rows in the metadata sheet. So remember that metadata sheet. Actually, I think I can probably pull it up. 1 second. See if I have a good example. Yeah, here's an example of the metadata sheet. So it's really just an Excel file. I change it to CSV to make it nice to work with. But it's an Excel file and it has these fields in it. So I'm going to check, next I'm going to check the number of rows in this spreadsheet, because I want to make sure that they match. The number of files should match the number of rows in the spreadsheet, because they want to have metadata for each file. Okay. I'm going to compare those two and see the number of matches between the file share files and the metadata spreadsheet. There's a lot of gotchas in this one. One of the gotchas is they have, say, 20,000 records of information that they have in their library, so to speak. Not all of those records they have files for electronically. Some of them might have been destroyed, some of them might have been sent off to archive, and they just don't have it. But they want to keep the record there in SharePoint. So I'm going to compare the files with the metadata sheet to see the number of records that have no document. I'm handling duplicates, both in the file share and the metadata spreadsheet. Potential missing records in the spreadsheet. I'm just checking for, what's the word? Contiguous, whatever. So it goes from 1 to 20,000, basically, you know, something like that. And checking for potential issues in the files. So I'm checking each file for the length of it to make sure it's not too long. Checking for invalid symbols because SharePoint doesn't allow just a couple of symbols like the % sign and, you know, those kind of things. Checking file types. There's some file types that are not allowed in SharePoint and stuff like that. So let's go through, and I'm going to try to explain some of these things and try and relate it to things that you guys might be able to do in your admin work or your dev work. So hopefully you can see this pretty well. So this first part, I'm adding in the SharePoint snap-in. This is kind of like the extensibility I was talking about. If you're working on a different product, framework, solution, you might have like SQL or Oracle or, you know, insert thing here. There's likely a module already created that has functions for you to do things in your system. So this is how I kind of imported that module. There's modules and snap-ins. Snap-ins are just the old version. Modules are the newer version. I added the snap-in here because it came with SharePoint. When we installed it on the server, it came with it. So it's pretty easy to just load it up. Setting up some initial variables here. What's up, Andre?
If it wasn't already on their system, how would you pull that snap-in or plug-in, or whatever it's called?
That's a good question, and it'll depend on the version of PowerShell you have. In newer versions of PowerShell, there's the PowerShell gallery, kind of like a NuGet kind of thing, where you can run to import modules. It's kind of a tricky subject, just like importing any other modules in any other
Package management.
Yeah, something like that because of security concerns. You may or may not have access to use some of these features, but you can always download the module file and import it similar to this. You would just give it like instead of Microsoft.SharePoint.PowerShell, you would give it the path of your module file. Microsoft has a lot of pre-made stuff for all their Microsoft products. So, you know, SharePoint, SQL, all sorts of .NET stuff. I forgot to mention, since we're talking about this kind of stuff, this full version of PowerShell runs on Windows systems, but there's also another edition called PowerShell Core. If you're familiar with .NET Core, that's what it uses. So that means it can be run on Mac OS, it can run on Linux, or whatever supports .NET Core. Now, it's not as fully functional, but you can get a lot of, you know, the stuff you want.
And most modules will be available, but not all. Right?
For the PowerShell Core, yeah.
Interesting. I think Leighton David talked on .NET Core. When I was out that day, I kind of dialed in for a little bit, but .NET Core will eventually be .NET is the way they're going forward with. So a lot of the stuff that's in PowerShell, that's not based on PowerShell Core, will actually get migrated over to PowerShell Core. That's likely the one that's going to get moved forward. The other one will be kind of a legacy.
When they, I'm not 100% on the history, but I think when they made PowerShell Core and .NET Core, the idea was to be open source. So that should help with moving forward. Yeah, I'm not sure if they're going to be discontinuing this, or this has been around since 2006, I believe. And it's just gotten more and more advanced, and more people are using it. So I initialized some variables. Variables in PowerShell is just this $, and then the name. Kind of works just like JavaScript a little bit. And I just say file path equals metadata sheet.csv, and it's gonna make that a kind of like a text. Start Excel is some number, so it's gonna recognize when you put it in.
Will it error if you give it, if you like basically create a type and it's a string, and then later on, or create a type and it's a number, and then later on you give it a string?
No, I don't think so. Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. So testing equals hello, Andre.
Make it a number.
Oh, a number first? Yeah. Okay. So let's say testing 2 equals 1, 2, 3, 4. And then make it a text?
Yeah.
Oh, and there's tab complete and IntelliSense for everything. So if there's a command available, it'll auto-populate if you tab. Like this?
Yeah. I guess
do that. Should be fine.
Yeah.
If you want, so
it's your foot.
Yeah. These variables stay in your PowerShell session. So as you just saw, I just made a variable and I just called it by just saying $testing2. I'll get to it in a little bit. I was gonna do something there. This stuff is just writing to the console, nothing crazy. I'm trying to focus on some of the more interesting stuff that might be applicable to you guys. So this one is pretty interesting. This is get child item. So a lot of the commands in PowerShell are in the format of verb dash noun. So like get child item, set child item, get host, set host, write host, that kind of thing. So this one is getting all the items from this path, and it's just pulling the files. And if there is an error, it's going to continue on. So let me see if I can quickly give you an example of this. Let me go to my desktop. Let's see what my work folder looks like. I'm going to do get child item and say path. I'm already in desktop, so let's say, let's give it the full one. It's going to autofill, so it helps you out a bit. Users, that's me, desktop. Let's say my work folder. Let's see what's in the work folder. And let's say we want to pull just the files. So these are the things just in the work folder. I have other folders underneath, so if I want to pull everything underneath it, I can just recurse that, and it's going to pull everything underneath. Now, it's going to be quite a bit of stuff. So what you can do is actually output this to a CSV file, and we can take a look at it there. So in PowerShell, you have the pipe operator where you can say, give me the output of this command, put it into that command. So I'm going to say, give me the output of that get child item, whatever it is. And I'm going to say out file put this somewhere. Say on my desktop. I'll call it dev talk. That's CSV. So now it's going to run the same command, getting all those files, and output it to a CSV.
So when you're clicking on your file system, it shows your file path in there. Is that something that is a plugin that you added, or is that default to PowerShell itself that traversed and like auto completed your file system?
I think it's an ISC.
I see. Okay. Pretty cool.
You mean like right here?
No, the command you're just writing. When you're going through it and you're writing it in, when you did see users, it showed the options there in line.
Oh, that's built in the PowerShell.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's full, like, essentially .NET and PowerShell IntelliSense here. So everything available to you, you'll see it. Say I'm looking at a file share, and there's actually like 6 shares there, but I only have access to 2 of them. The IntelliSense will only pull up 2 of them. So it is security controlled. So if I don't have access to it, I can't, access it. So actually, I don't know how many things I have in my. Oh, it's finished. Forgot, because I do a lot of testing with a whole bunch of documents. So sometimes I can have, a few thousand files in there. So I called this dev talk. And here's that output in a CSV file. Now, if I want to, I can actually pull certain things out of this, or just display certain things. Like, say I only care about the name. I can just put a parameter in here, attribute. In this case, I just want to pull the name. So it'll do the same thing, but it's just going to pull out the name. This kind of object selection of properties makes it easy to work with, whether you put it in a CSV file or you just put it in some temporary array. It makes it a lot easier. So these items that I'm getting are actual objects, and they have these properties. So again, I can pull certain attributes from those. So this is what just the name looks like. So here's all the names. I wonder how many. I have a lot of testing files in here.
I've got node module directory, I know.
Yeah. That's a point that you just inspired me to make is, say you're looking through a file share or something and you want to spot certain things. Like, say you want to spot, I don't know, exes or node install files that may or may not have to be there. You can use this kind of command with some attributes. You can look up the command to find all the attributes and tons of examples on how to use it, but this can be used to find, stuff like that, and you don't have to use a third-party tool. Okay. So that's a kind of a big one, because that's kind of how we're doing these migrations. Is the source for this is a file share. So if we can access that file share and we can pull the files, then we can just do everything else in logic inside the script. Some for loops. I'm looping through all the files inside. I'm not going to go into too much detail on all these, just for time constraints. But, some kind of standard programming stuff. Let's see what else is interesting here. Oh, you can import a CSV into your program. So I have this array called imported, where I'm importing that metadata spreadsheet. So that CSV file that has all those attributes on it, I'm actually pulling that into PowerShell just in this one line. And if I say like imported dot program, it's going to pull this whole column of program. So it's very quick and easy to import CSVs. Let's see what other interesting stuff here. What's that?
Question. So I'm a little unfamiliar with PowerShell. Is there a comparable program? Is it a program or something within Windows only? It's a subject that I'm not too familiar.
I would compare to Bash, and I think it was object-oriented Bash instead of the same text that it typed in the definite object.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The PowerShell
This specifically is just an ISE environment to make it nice to make scripts. But if I wanted to, I can do this same thing just through a command line interface, just like command prompt or. Oops, I loaded the wrong one.
They have a really good integration with VS Code. I know the PowerShell team, I think, is leaning towards using VS Code as a default now instead of ISE.
So, it'll look like this, just like a command prompt, but it's going to have those extra features inside of it that command prompt doesn't have. Let's see. Quickly go through this, see if anything is interesting. So this is still the analysis part. Since I pulled in those files, I now have all the attributes, so I can do all these things, like get the actual document number, because it's not exactly clear where it is. So I have to figure out where that number is, and all these things. Here's some piping of some stuff. So as I'm going through this analysis, I'm actually outputting kind of each step of the way, so I can go back and see how many matches there were, non-matches, issues, all that stuff. So a lot of this is mostly programming stuff. Let me jump into the second one, since we're getting over there in time. So that was the first one. They had 20,000 files, 300 gigs. It was in a file share. The next one is one we're actually doing right now as we speak. It's running. We're migrating DocuShare over to SharePoint. DocuShare is another content management system. I think Xerox makes it.
Yeah.
So they have their own proprietary stuff, and it's not fun to to do some migrations with. But luckily, there's a feature in DocuShare where you can map DocuShare as a network drive on your machine. It's called DocuShare Drive in this case. And that's the key that allowed us to use PowerShell. Because since we can map the DocuShare as a network drive, we can then access that in PowerShell and do those same commands, get child items and all these things. This one.
Probably using less resources than third-party software.
Yeah, that's we tried a third-party software and it was very slow. I don't want to say the beauty, but one of the benefits of using PowerShell is we can tune it to exactly what we need. So we don't have all this extra processing going on. Because if you look at these numbers here, 300,000 files, and 34,000 folders, which are nested very deep, 900 gigabytes in total. We have to do things for each file. So we're actually turning the folder names into metadata and flattening the structure so there's no more folders. We're allowing the user to specify which folder goes into which metadata field. That's similar, we're pulling in a spreadsheet of information and using that in our processing. So we're doing all this processing for 300,000 files. I think I did some calculations. Even if we processed a file per second, it would still take like 90 hours just to migrate the information. And some of these files are a couple gigabytes large. So some of them are more than a few seconds. Some of the files run in, 100 milliseconds or so. So let me show you that one. This one is a little bit more unpolished and raw. Not really perfect for presentation, but sometimes that's the real world, So I do have some sort of commenting here based on our gotcha stuff inside of here. I had to make 2 modes for this script. And that's one of the things I'd like to show real quick is when you run a PowerShell script, you can actually set it to have some parameters and do things based on those parameters. So here I have a parameter for the mode it's in, whether it be temp mode or config mode. So when you run the script, it's going to prompt you for what mode you want. I'm not sure if this is going to... Okay, there we go. So it's going to prompt me for the mode.
It's not going to interrupt our migration that's happening right now.
No.
Okay. Sure.
So
Yeah.
there is a migration happening, but this is a copy of the script. So
Well, it's not pointing at the same location.
yeah. So yeah, you can have parameters in your PowerShell scripts, and it doesn't have to be like for the user like this. It would be piped into when you run the script. So say you wanted to run a script. What folder am I in? And then work. Forget which folder I'm in. But anyway, when you run the script, you give it the path and then whatever script name .ps1. If you've ever seen a ps1 file, that's PowerShell. And then you would give it the attributes, and those are your parameters. So I would say like mode temp, and I would do the same thing as just pressing run and having to enter it. So this makes it easy to do it remotely or on a schedule or something like that. Here's an instance of actually using a .NET object. I don't use a ton of .NET objects, but I use this one because it's nice. This is the system.diagnostic stopwatch. This lets me do some execution timer stuff to see how long the scripts are taking. So yeah, every .NET class you can instantiate here. So I'm saying make a new stopwatch, start new, and I'm setting that to a variable execution time. And at the very end of the script,
Question.
I just say stop, and then I output the elapsed time.
So let's say, for example, we wrote some .NET to do part of this, right? Or then we can pull that .NET in here and call it from here with the data that is present. So let's say we wrote some .NET to do the branching and the metadata assignment, right? Could we do get the file name and then call our .NET code to make the .NET even send back the parameters and type in a structure or something like that.
That's a good question.
You can load arbitrary DLLs in PowerShell, so anything you can compile to a DLL in .NET, you can just keep in PowerShell.
Yeah, if you register DLLs,
Yeah, that would be interesting. So, like you can have a hybrid.
It's on the column, the
Yeah.
OS.
Have each part do what it's best.
Yeah.
You can't run it, the next thing, because that's the level of it.
And that's it, so you like, you have that different libraries that you said,
Yeah. I mean, this snap-in that I added here is just a DLL. That's registered on the machine. So yeah, I guess if you make your own DLL, you can do that. I've never done that. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I guess I imagine that's a thing.
Yeah.
I guess you could even like make your own DLL in .NET to do whatever, and then put it inside of a PowerShell script, and then have that run on a schedule. And you can do all that in just a couple lines of code. And X amount of machines. You know? So, cool. This is some SharePoint stuff. These are added based on that snap-in. Makes it really easy to get our SharePoint stuff. So I'm just getting the site, getting the document library, and getting a list of files. So that helps me with comparison and stuff like that. More programming stuff. Oh, this is an interesting one. I had to end up using Robocopy. Robocopy now is built in. It used to be Xcopy. It allows me to pull files that have a length longer than the default, whatever it is, 260 something or whatever. Because some of these, I don't know if I still have the. I don't know if I still have it up, but I did an analysis on all these, and just the folder names alone for DocuShare is a lot. The longest the longest folder I think was like 800 characters.
Yeah.
And we're talking like 10 nested folders, and each folder name is really long. So you can't just do that using get child item.
It's probably have your characters also.
Yeah.
Inside of the name.
Yeah. Luckily, that DocuShare drive, I noticed it converts the symbols for us into something that Windows accepts. Yeah. So lucky for us, it's kind of in a Windows format already. But still, to put it into SharePoint, we had to exclude some of the symbols.
Plus the lamp. The lamp. All the names. All the names and the lamp itself.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here as far as gotcha stuff. I'm not going into each little detail, but I'm replacing some of the symbols here. It's a little bit raw and not polished, but it gets the job done.
And nothing else you can put underscore or a dash, so that we don't have to worry about all the craziness.
Yeah.
Involving
Let's see what other cool stuff is here. I mean, again, my goal is not to make you guys experts if you aren't already, but just to show you what can be done, give you some inspiration on what you might be able to do.
So I'm not sure if you were going to touch on this or not, but a lot of so Microsoft has doubled down on PowerShell. So a lot of the tooling, the built-in applications are actually running PowerShell, and then the GUI is just running the PowerShell behind the scenes. So like you're managing servers, IIS, and all those other things. They're really, PowerShell is the main interface, and then got the GUI on top of it. So if you can get to it with PowerShell, you can do a lot of functionality, and then you can start automating things in a more kind of fashion in a Windows design. It's really, really a powerful thing. Yeah, well, a lot of
yeah.
So no love on the Windows administrators, but a lot of them are point and click, kind of administration. That's fine if you have the knowledge, but when you start administering dozens of VMs or hundreds of VMs, having this kind of knowledge becomes really useful because then you can just, write the script, source control it, that sort of thing, and execute it across multiple machines.
Related to that, we did some PowerShell in order to, we had 50, interns, like around 40 or 50. And so I wrote some PowerShell that ran properly to install software based on profiles.
And we put all that, try to put all the, and I had some other PowerShell that I need to rewrite some files and paths and stuff like that for my application. That's what I try to do is I found I created a, that's like a common script kind of thing in GitHub, and I created a PowerShell folder. I think I sent it out to the group that if you have common PowerShell scripts you think are useful, you throw them there, and then other people go and look at it and say, I need to do style renaming, across the thing, and then stuff like, I think in my case, I need to rename styles in a certain, I didn't even name every style that it had a pattern to it, and so PowerShell was an easy tool to solve that pattern, that problem. And so I just make it useful if someone else has exactly that, if the pattern is useful, I'll throw it up in the GitHub repo. So I'll try to send an email out with that, or a link out with that to this Scott channel, and maybe get the notes out. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to do notes. I have time. I won't lie, I said, I'm going to do notes. I'll post a link in the Slack channel. At least do that.
On the topic of sysadmin stuff, are you gonna touch on PowerShell DSC?
No.
Well, just like as an addendum to how this can make Windows administration stuff really easy, there's a feature in PowerShell called PowerShell DSC, Desired State Configuration, which is sort of a Microsoft-heavy infrastructure as code solution. So you can configure hundreds of Windows VMs just by deploying some PowerShell DSC code. So that's really useful in like a hybrid environment where you're spinning up hundreds of Windows VMs and just don't have all of them have all the same settings and applications.
Pretty neat.
Sounds like a talk. Yeah, can't talk too much or I'll get like volunteers to talk.
I volunteer people who just quiet. Randomly pick people. Review for tomorrow.
Well, we're about at the time. Any questions that I can answer? I'm just kidding.
So if you want to get started, what's an easy way for people to get started using PowerShell? Like any tips or tricks or references that you would point people at?
Microsoft has a whole gallery of PowerShell scripts for the most, like, I think it was like the top 100 common sysadmin and developer tasks or something like that. It's very useful. To be honest, I'm a search engine guy, so search engine is good. Just look up whatever your challenge is, put in the word PowerShell, and likely someone already has something. So you'll find like either it's already in Microsoft Docs or in a Stack Overflow or something like that, Stack Exchange. It's out there, just look for it.
To add to that, I don't know if everyone here has to take role-based training, but those that do have access to IT Pro TV, they have a learning track on PowerShell, which is kind of nice. It's all videos.
Cool.
So you have to log 4 hours of video watching in order to pass that course. You can use that. It's about half an hour.
A tangent to that around search engines. So sometimes you take it for granted, but I want to so let me say that. We're going to do a talk. We were going to do a talk, or we're probably going to do a talk on searching. It sounds stupid, right? But it's not. There's a lot of tricks into how you use Google search, things that are hidden below the surface that will make your life so much easier. There was a dev, I can speak about it because he's no longer here. We had a process that he was running. It was like exponential. So it was taking him, I think when it started off, it was a few minutes to run the script. And then by the time I got involved in it, it was taking days for it to complete. And so I looked at it, and said, oh yeah, this is an exponential algorithm. And I asked him to go and say, do you understand what this is? He didn't, obviously. I was like, hey, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to, search on it. Now that you know what it is, and I'll come back and we can review it and we can talk about it, right? So I came back and he searched, but he didn't. Like, that's where the whole point of, like, I took it for granted that everyone knew how to use Google, right? But there are some things that I showed him that he had never seen before. And so that was the point where we're going to say, here are some tips and tricks on how to use Google. Time-based searching, limiting it to a certain domain. The phrasing that you put in is, I think, one of the things he was searching for, the exponential thing. I'm like, that's not going to get you what you're looking for, right? So, yeah, he thought the Wikipedia page and all that stuff, but it's not. You're not finding the solution for what you're looking for, right? So there's a lot to it, and probably I don't know it all, right? I've been at this for like 20 years, but I probably missed something that someone got in 10 minutes. So maybe we'll have a session where we say, here's some tips and tricks on how do you learn, and part of that learning is how do you search efficiently for what you're looking for, right? Because that can mean the difference between having a problem stuck on for 3 days or having a problem stuck on for like 10 minutes. Right?
One last thing I want to branch off a little bit on that is, one thing I noticed with this is at first, this one with the 300,000 documents, it was taking a while. And one thing I used is this PowerShell feature. This one is built in, it's not using the .NET library, so it's very easy to just say, measure this command for how long it takes. So you just wrap your command inside of measure command. So let's do that. And it's gonna, since I already did this, it's probably cached, so it's gonna run quickly. But you could see, this ran in 202 milliseconds. So what I did is I just kind of went through each of my commands and measured how long they took. And the ones that took a while, I tried to find a better way to do it. And it kept improving my speed, which was really important for this 300,000 files. It really helped out.
It's almost like a filtered profiler for your own.
Yeah, exactly.
I missed that. I'm sorry.
Sure. Oh, I have this file open still. So for this DocuShare migration, it's 300,000 files.
Yeah.
And at the start, when I was first making the script, it just took so long per file. So what I did is I wrapped each of my commands inside a measure command to see how long it took.
Okay. How does it output it?
Yeah, so it outputs you can change how you want it to output. But by default, it outputs, days, hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds. Let me this might be a little bit risky to do live.
No, never mind. Okay.
Let me show you.
Too much riding on that one.
Let me show you what the live thing is actually doing on the server.
Famous last words.
Because
go apologize for something else today.
It's probably not super easy to see, but, and it's.
Don't press any buttons.
So as
it's been running since Saturday. Don't want to start over.
Well, I can restart it anytime I want, and it's going to pick up from where it left off. So that's a good thing. But I had to build that in because I didn't want to keep running it. But for this one, this is just for my curiosity. I want to see how long each file takes to migrate. So that's what this timer for is. It's going through each file, and this is how long they're taking to migrate. And I output as it goes through each folder as well. So that's one of the folders in DocuShare.
Yeah, that's how long it is.
So
That's milliseconds?
these are in milliseconds, yes. I can change this to whatever I like and make it seconds or minutes, hours, days.
Hopefully not.
But I have some output files that are going on here too. Like these are the folders that have been migrated already because I'm looping through each folder in DocuShare.
How long does it take to open that?
Now you're locking this file and it's going to try to write in there.
No, well, actually, that's a pretty cool thing is you can open the file without locking it,
Oh, nice.
even if you're writing to it in PowerShell script, which is really nice. It doesn't work for every case, but in this case it works. So I have all these files. Let me real quick see if I can throw this into a, where's my control home? Control shift home. No. Well, A. Control home. No. Control function home. Okay.
That's how real development works, bitch.
Try to remember the keybinds. It's one of these chords that have like 6 buttons.
Control.
Smash the keyboard vigorously until something comes out.
Yeah.
Take the results.
That's not right. It's not 60,000. Let's try to go to like, I think it's around like 25,000 right now. But these are the amount of folders it's gone through. 25,183 out of 34,000.
Getting there.
10,000 more.
And if you just pull this single folder,
Yeah, that's
He
low,
said
though.
39,000, so you still got like a long way to go.
well, these are folder names, which are 34,000 folders.
Okay, okay.
So these are,
Same level.
This is a
File name. Oh.
this is what that folder is in DocuShare, just to give you an example. This slash this slash this slash this. So it can get pretty crazy. So that's why doing that measure command was so important for me to optimize my script. It really helped a lot.
Program create this file name, they're like, oh well. Somebody else has to parse the data, not me.
So yeah, that's running live right now, migrating files.
But somebody manually actually created that team, so many levels, and created, it took years. Everybody look at the format, they're not changing.
And this script, I think the lifespan of it, maybe 3 weeks if you'd be generous with the time.
Yeah.
Like I was sick for a few days and I wasn't really super rushing, but it took about 3 weeks to do this. And I think probably maybe some time could have been better spent before then analyzing third-party tools, but here we are.
So, Robert, we've got a couple questions in Slack. One
Oh,
of
sure.
which Steven was asking that he was saying piped PowerShell tasks seem to sometimes buffer the entire output of the command before piping to the next command. Is there any way to make it behave more Unix-like and pass it line by line or object by object? Like this came up when you were doing the
recursing the entire work directory and it didn't do anything until it had populated the entire thing.
I guess you could loop through it one by one. I mean,
Yeah, well, there's the for each shortcut, right? The percent sign. You can do it for each.
yeah, so like say I have an array of files, I can do a for each on each file and do something there. But as far as like, I don't know, if it does take a long time, then yeah, the buffers do matter, and your available memory can matter. I mean, I wrote that in one line of code. If you want to really do that kind of thing, you'd have to expand your code for sure.
Another question. Have you run into any security issues related to PowerShell? And if so, how have you handled them? I think that's more of an administration question.
We don't take those here.
Sysadmins allowed.
No, I'm just
I mean, it's like I was saying before, it's pretty security controlled. So, I mean, if you imagine going to a file share in your Windows Explorer, you don't have access. It's going to give you an error message. It's going to do the same thing in PowerShell. If you have like GPO settings that are blocking you from doing certain tasks on your machine and you try to do that in PowerShell, it's going to block you.
I think sysadmins also at the group policy level can ban certain commands, so that's something to take into account.
Yeah, even though this is on every machine, it can be controlled by admins so that users can't just do whatever they want.
I use this a lot in the database to run scripts to put those credentials.
Oh, if I understood that correctly, how do you kind of connect and do things in like a database?
Yeah, no, I already do. I use that. It can use your Windows credentials to log into your, SQL Server.
Yeah, for sure. And even with the new stuff like online, like SharePoint Online, Office 365, there's ways built in that you can pass your credentials.
But also, if it's already running on the SharePoint, it uses your login credentials, like your GAC, right?
Yeah, by default, if you open up PowerShell, it's going to open up in whatever credentials you have. Yeah.
There was one other question. What are some of the biggest gotchas you've encountered while writing PowerShell scripts, and how can you advise us to avoid repeating your mistakes?
That's a good question.
Who asked that?
James.
For sure, things that take a long time to run. That was my biggest problem, obviously, with this DocuShare one is, each file was taking like 30 seconds. So using that measure command really helped out. And I just did some research on how I can improve that. That was a big gotcha. Another gotcha is that thing I mentioned before with the get files, get child item, which is really the same thing as doing a dir or ls. They're just aliases. But this by default does not support anything larger than the 264 or whatever it is limit. So that's why I use robocopy, which handles that. So that was a big gotcha, because I didn't find a large file name until I was like a few hundred folders in. So I had to change my code and then rerun it again. So that was a big gotcha.
Side note, I think they did fix the file name size image in a more recent build of Windows, but all of our agency machines are still on old enough build. They still have that.
So it was interesting. I listened to a podcast that talked a lot about this. They quote unquote fixed it many moons ago, but the problem is all the other things don't know that it's fixed. Right.
Yeah.
So they're protecting you.
Yeah.
Right, from the problem that no longer exists, and that's where a lot of the issues come in. So although Windows has fixed it, maybe the version of .NET that you're running does not know that it's fixed, or the file system thing doesn't know that it's fixed, or pick whatever you want after that doesn't know that the 260 characters is no longer a limit. They're slowly working their way through all the things, but that's so. You may run into a problem here and not run into it looking at it from a different perspective.
I think I tried that first with this get child item. My first thing I found was how to increase the limit in Windows. And I actually ended up changing a registry key to see if that would work. But it didn't work inside of PowerShell. It worked inside of Windows, but not inside of PowerShell. So that's what Andre was talking about. That's why I have to use robocopy. That was one of the gotchas. Yeah, those are the main gotchas.
So you shorten the names, then you migrate it to the SharePoint?
No, so from DocuShare? No, so the interesting thing about this one, let me see if I can show real quick again. PowerPoint. We're making this entirely flat. That's one thing. So you're not getting that folder jumble slash.
Just the file name.
So yeah, we just have the file name, and then on the side of it in SharePoint, we have the folder path, which can be thousands of characters. But Actually, in SharePoint 2016, which is the version we're throwing this into, it no longer has that same limitation. So it can be a lot longer. I tried looking up the limitations like in documentation, but for some reason Microsoft didn't put it.
255, that's it. We're done.
Yeah, they have documentation for 2010 SharePoint 13, but after that, they don't give you an upper limit for a file
That
name.
they're working through it.
Yeah, it's like this. We're in the process of fixing it. We don't want to put it out there. Just
Well, that's
Same.
SharePoint 2016. What year are we in now?
like I said, we're still in the process of fixing it.
Yeah. So yeah, we haven't had any issues with file names. Actually, another good point is if I do have any errors, I'm doing a big try catch on all this stuff. So here's my try, and here's all the processing I'm doing in each file. And I can catch that and write that message to an error file. So as it's running, it's going to be outputting any errors to the error file.
I'll rewrite it.
So I can check there to see if any issues arise, which is really neat. Yeah. Another kind of gotcha, but it's just in this case, is we're moving from DocuShare to SharePoint. If I do it directly, for some reason it was really slow. This is one of my improvements. But what seemed to work a lot quicker is in DocuShare, I can pull all the files in a particular folder, move it to a temporary folder on my server, and then move it to SharePoint. For some reason, that's like 10 times faster. So I actually have a temp folder here. When it processes each, what is this? When it processes each folder, it's actually pulling in all the files for that folder. Into this temp folder here. So this is the folder it's working on currently. These are the files that are in some particular folder. For some reason, this is a lot faster than just doing it directly file by file. Because remember, we're doing stuff for each file. We're trimming out some invalid symbols. We're making sure there's no duplicates because we're flattening the structure.
Yeah, but you're doing it locally as opposed to the network, right?
I don't know why. It's just for some reason.
Well, going over network's a lot slower than going over
Well,
local
it's still
files.
going over network and pull the files
Yeah.
locally.
It pulls all,
Yeah.
he said he copies the folder, which gets all the files, so that everything's local at that point.
Yeah, but
Right,
they
I'm
still have to
pulling
pull the files locally.
from
It's the same
DocuShare.
network call. You're putting it in a different location and then moving it to the final location. Maybe it's,
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure.
don't know.
Maybe it's the way that PowerShell holds all those files in memory while it's processing. I don't know.
Maybe it's a SharePoint thing. Maybe it's coming from a trusted location.
I didn't have the time to analyze it further. I just improved it and went on.
Understood.
Maybe that's why Tsunami did the same.
Your mic is.
Oh, we can't mute them. Then we can't hear what they're saying.
Sorry about that. We had some echoing going on.
Oh, yeah. All right. I thought someone was asking a question.
Yeah, when we had that third-party tool we were analyzing, it was doing something similar to this, actually. It wasn't moving it directly into SharePoint. It was putting it into a temp location. So I tried that, and it worked really well.
But that thing was slow, just.
Yeah, we tried to move like, what, 500 files or something? And it,
Like 5 gig, it took like half a day,
yeah, it was crazy.
overnight.
Yeah. So now it's going through more folders as we look at it. But yeah, that was another one of the improvements that I did based on a gotcha.
About that. I think we should add that as a standard question.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we should start building a list of questions to ask after every talk
Mhm.
on like a certain category. Like if it's a framework or a language, always ask like,
We-
what things did you run into?
We started to do that, but then we never had another language or framework. So if someone wants to volunteer to give one, I think, oh, I take that back. We did do GraphQL and we did that point.
But that was over 3 left, I think.
I mean, if it's not too much of a burden for the presenters, you could build that into the presentation or talk. I mean,
Yeah, they have to know ahead of time.
Yeah, you'd have to know ahead of time.
All right. Anything else? We're running low on time now. I want to make sure we clean up the room. All right.
Now we're gonna have training.
So, I guess it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, he just said that there's training on IT Pro for it.
Yeah, that's for the admins. Yeah, I don't know. This is a mixed bag. I know for our contract, there is some stuff that we can get through. But again, that's specific to us. I don't want to say that general population. It's not pertaining to everyone, but
So it's a DIY.
yeah.
And a lot of, so part of the reason for this too is
We can train each other, right? If one person knows something, like we can help learn, It's one thing to watch a video, and it's another thing to go through a tutorial.
and it's another thing to have your specific problem that you're running into solved. And I think they're all valuable. But you need really to grasp about this stuff from market. This group is meant to serve as the part of that, one that introduces you to things that maybe you didn't know were there that you help solve a problem, and then two, having like you back to the group, I may have a plugin that says, Mike's gonna have another plugin that says, and I'm gonna have a different plugin that says, now you have a group. And that's kind of why I know the different people that help. But using that hive mind to help all of us get a little bit further ahead. I think that's my goal for the group. As long as just getting people to know other people and that sort of thing. But when it's functioning properly, hopefully once you do, then you don't have that classification between who's inside and who's not inside. You're like, find this, and I'm going here for that, and that. I think that will accelerate quite a bit. Again, it won't even be just starter people at that point. It'll be massive devs and massive admins and everything. Excellent.
Okay, so first question, are you validating data integrity after your
Yeah.
Yes, but this
Turn off the
case,
recording. No, I'm trying.
this case is very annoying to do. Since we're flattening, so DocuShare is not read-only at the moment. So people are still putting in files every day. So after this migration is done, we have to go back and do an incremental crawl. I keep saying crawl, incremental migration to pick up anything that's newer. So in SharePoint, we have, where's my mouse? Where's my mouse? Let me see if I can open it up real quick. So I'm essentially in SharePoint flattening everything, so there's just file names and the path it belongs to. For my data validation at the end, I'm literally pulling everything from SharePoint, everything that exists in DocuShare, throwing that into PowerShell and comparing the two. So since I have all the file names and the paths or the folders that they belong to, I can compare, folder by folder in DocuShare, file by file in DocuShare. If anything's newer in DocuShare, I'm pulling that into SharePoint. Otherwise, I'm ignoring it. That kind of thing.
Excuse me, how do you handle collisions? Like the same name in a different folder gets repeated to a flat.
Duplicates are an interesting one. Let me see if I can pull up exactly where I'm doing that. Essentially, I'm doing what Windows does in a way. So like say we have new text file.txt and another new text file.txt. I'm renaming the second one to the parentheses 1, parentheses 2, so on and so forth. A running number variable there. So that is here. So this is something that we had to add because since we're flattening, we are going to get duplicates. So we don't want to just overwrite. We want to include that with the parentheses, the number, and then the parentheses. The data validation here for the incremental migration at the end is kind of an annoying part because I'm actually trimming this off once I pull it in to do the analysis. Because in DocuShare, it's still without this parentheses and the number. It's only in SharePoint because I flattened everything.
What original name was with parentheses and numbers inside.
It's just going to append another parentheses and number, just like Windows would, right? Yeah, I tried to mimic what Windows does. Yeah, I mean, but
Document 1, 2.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, basically I'm doing a while loop here. So I have all my SharePoint files while it contains this file I'm working on. So if it's a duplicate, keep renaming it until it's no longer in that list of files. So yeah, that's how I'm handling duplicates.
I think we're at our time. So thank you, Robert. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. I'm not sure where, but I'll make all this information available and where you can find Microsoft-based documentation as well as some sites that have helped me in the past.
Awesome. Again, if you guys have any topics, they don't have to be for the whole session either. I think we did a lightning talk session a little while ago. That was pretty popular. So I think maybe we'll schedule, if we don't have a long form topic for next time, then we'll schedule some lightning talks. If you have ideas for those, they can be as small as 5 minutes, as long as 15 minutes. Try not to be longer than that. Then it's not really lightning talking longer.
So I'm gonna volunteer myself for after